Oh, well, that's what Tammy tells you, too. Anyway, you know, I want to mention the purpose of this class, and I think I need to do it each time we get together. The purpose in this class is to show you ways that you can approach people with your faith and with knowledge to win them to Christ. Right? That's the point. Because generally, I put up the constructs, the paradigms, harm, culture, history, law, science, the New Testament, Old Testament. Which construct do we usually use when we approach people? For the gospel. The New Testament, the Old Testament construct, right? Well, we know that's not always effective. Matter of fact, we know it's not effective in the modern world about 90% of the time. It wasn't effective in the beginning of the church either. Why? Yeah, they didn't have a New Testament, number one, and they couldn't carry it around. They didn't have the books, right? And number two, the Old Testament, have you ever seen an Old Testament scroll, Torah scroll? Are you going to carry that around with you? Well, they had knowledge, based in some of the things, sayings and things like that, history. But what took the world by storm, and we've talked about this in other classes that we've had, what took the world by storm was the fact that those Christians were coming around with a message that fit easily within their constructs of life, their understandings. In fact, when we looked at Matthew, we saw in Matthew that the Sermon on the Mount was a Jewish or a Greek argument. We saw that Matthew itself is a Greek argument. And so the methods that were being used in the early church were not our perceived or ideas of methods to approach people. They were more along the lines that I'm showing you. Remember Paul's speech at Athens? Paul's preaching at Athens? Which one did it fit into? He used culture and history and even quoted the Greeks and used Greek arguments to talk to them about the unknown God, which then he segued into, the New Testament gospel, right? Do you see that? I mean, this is what the Gospels and this is what the documents show us. And by the way, they are what kind of documents? Historical documents. So, in any case, that's the reason for this class. I mean, it's very important to note that. The other thing that's important to note is, do you know what? You are free to disagree at any time, in any place, with anything here. However, there's one thing that's very important. The way that we're approaching it, you might ask, well, what do I believe? Well, which construct are we in? Because if you want to talk about energy science, I'm not going to the Old Testament, New Testament construct. You're not going to get a whole lot out of that. But I'm going to go to the science construct. And if I want to talk about law or legal things, I'll go to the legal construct, the law construct. If I want to talk about history, I'll go to the historical construct. Right? So what do you believe? Culture is what you believe about your history. Johnny Appleseed and George Washington, the cherry tree. But is it history? See? What do you believe? So what we are looking at is not what we think or even what we believe, but what? What can we prove? So many things, if you disagree with them, depending on what they are. If I state an opinion, I'll try to identify it. If anyone states an opinion, we'll try to identify it. But the reality is that it's okay to disagree with an opinion. However, if you find yourself disagreeing with something that's established in fact, that's when we got to start thinking about why do we believe what we believe? Why do we think? Because ultimately this class is about not only tools, how to learn, how to know things in truth, but also what is true? What can we prove as truth? To kind of segue, I want to mention something about harm construct, but I'm going to start with something that we should have mentioned right at the beginning, and I usually get into that. Can we prove a truth? Not really. If you remember back in your geometry, what could you prove in your geometry? Do you remember?
That something was not true.
You could prove a not true. You can't prove a true. You can only prove a not true. The Greeks knew this because their word for truth is aletheia, which means not false. See? You can prove a not true. And so, for example, could I ever prove there is God? Can I prove there is God? No, I can't. That is an impossible thing to prove. Can I prove that there is... I could prove that there is not a God. That is a potential proof. Unfortunately, no one has ever achieved that. Matter of fact, there are wonderful proofs. The body of Christian and non-Christian and secular philosophy for 2,000 years plus is to do what? Anybody study philosophy? To prove God. That's what philosophy is all about. Well, at least until the 20th century. And then I'm not sure what philosophy is about after that. But the purpose of philosophy until the 20th century is to prove God. Jonathan Edwards, St. Augustine, Newton, all the famous philosophers and scientists, their whole job was to do that. Yeah, that's the first thing. Number two is in the harm construct, the one I didn't get to last week that I really needed to get to. You guys remember the harm construct? It starts with 10 and it goes to 0, no harm. What was 10? Does anybody remember what 10 is? It's on your sheet, so I guess you could cheat and look. But yeah, I put 9 as death, and then 10 is eternal separation. Eternal, anyway, separation. Okay, the reason that I didn't speak about it initially is because this is one that will, upset our secular brethren and sistren, right? Because this is a concept, this is one of belief. I can't prove there is a heaven, right? But part of our belief structure, because of the constructs that we work in, is that there is a possibility of eternal separation from God.
No, the church can levy that one.
And, well, not so much the church, but, God, right, can levy that one. That's an important point. But in any case, this is where we usually go for. So many times decisions that Christians and even in the secular world, for example, the Muslim community, we know that they uphold culturally and, okay, I'm going to state this straight out. The harm construct is based in logic. Greek, logic. We, as Western civilization people, accept it. Other cultures might not accept it. Why would they not accept it? And I'm going to get into this really in detail. This is important stuff. What would prevent them from accepting it?
Theologically?
They look at it, what? Theologically, which means they're in what construct? Well, Quran. I didn't put the Quran as a construct. I could put the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever. We could replace this. This is really, I don't like to use this word with Christianity, but this is really a religious construct. Right? Religious construct. This is a religious construct. So I don't like to use that word because Christianity is historically based and not religious-based, religion-based. However, the world looks at it as if it's religion-based, right? So part of the problem of the issue is that they would look at it as a religion-based issue. The point of it is the tools that we use were developed by the Greeks. Our civilization is based on what? Greek rationalism. Are there any other tools to know truth? Actually, there are. But you can't know truth with them. I'll give you an example. What tool do Hindus use to know truth? Anybody know? Huh?
They live within karma and
But what do they do? America, it's taught in Western civilization a lot. Or not Western Civ, but it has invaded Western Civ. Meditation, right. You meditate on the world, on your brain, on whatever, on nothingness, and you will achieve enlightenment, right? That's a focus of Hinduism and Buddhism. Okay, guys, use rational thought here. If I meditate on nothing, what will I get out of it?
That's Greek rational though.
Right, that is Greek rational thought. However, how many people have invented light bulbs by meditating on a light bulb? Or meditating on nothing? If I meditate on a light bulb, if I think about a light bulb, that's thinking. That's using the tools of logic and scientific method and legal historical method. If you guys discover a new tool, I want to be the first one to know.
Accidents.
But guess what? No one has invented or achieved any other tools to know truth. So when I state that the harm matrix is truly a evidentiary piece of logic, and I'll give you an example. Remember, I love this because it always gets people riled up. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Huh? Okay, I will prove to you that it's true. Watch this. Watch this. I'll prove to you it's true. Who doesn't speak German here? Who doesn't know any German? Everybody knows German. No? Okay? Okay? Du bist ein Schweinhund. Du bist ein schwarzer Schweinhund. Du bist ein schwarzer Schweinhund. Und du bist... I'm going to say that. Can you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, pig herding. But that
No,
bother
he didn't
me.
understand a word of it.
Well, he said he couldn't speak German, so could he understand the German I was using? I was calling him terrible things in German. Horrible things. The same things with French. Could my words ever hurt him? Why? Because he can't understand what I'm saying. Now, if I cock back my fist and I strike him, will that hurt? Well, my goodness gracious. If I take a stick and beat him, will that hurt him?
What's your definition of hurt? Because if he could understand you, it mentally can be more damaging than physical.
No, you missed the point.
I did.
What happens? What does it mean? What does it mean if I believe that words themselves can hurt you? What did I automatically confer to words? Well, number one, that he could understand, but that's not the point. Because if I'm even speaking English, but he can't understand my English, the words themselves can never hurt you. You see? A fist can hurt you. Words can't hurt you. Okay? What hurts is the impression that the person has. Many times, if you say something to your spouse, and even if you're saying it nicely, sometimes there's misinterpretation, isn't there? Whose fault was that? I always say it's the communicator's fault. However, the reality is, it isn't just the communicator's fault. You see? The problem is that many times, as I said, if you believe words can truly hurt, what have you done with the words? What have you made the words? You've made them magic. You've given them a reality beyond their reality. You are basically moving into what we call what kind of thinking? It's pagan worldview. Pagan worldview, for example, if you believe abracadabra is a magic word, if you believe there are magic words, what have you moved into? Pagan worldview. You've moved out of rational thought. Because there are no words that can hurt you unless I make a word out of concrete and throw it at you. Because the words, remember what he said, I can never really know what you're thinking. Even if I told you I hate you, you can't know what I'm thinking. In many books, how many times does the main character tell, there's a subset of books where the main character may say, I hate you. And they really don't hate the person at all, but they're trying to dissuade them in some way. Do you see what I'm saying? You cannot know truth in emotion. You cannot know truth in thoughts at all. You have to use other tools to know truth. This is a proof text of how words cannot hurt you, but sticks and stones certainly can. So again, you have to be cautious about what you think is true. Because what you think is true may not be true. Culturally, our culture today has become one of hate speech. Well, what language? What speech? I asked government one time, what words can I not say? They say there's certain words that will get you in real trouble. So what can I not say? Do you have the list? Can I see it? Of course not. They're magic words.
I'll know it when I hear it.
You'll know it when you hear it, right? This goes into a lot of things. What's pornography?
I'll know it when I see it.
Well, I don't know. Somebody called, there's a beautiful statue of Diana, she's naked, in Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's one of those beautiful statues in the world. But is it pornography because she's naked? You know, there were at the turn of the century, you know, not turn of the 1900s, people who said that any nudes in art were pornography. Of course, they didn't know that word at that point. But anyway, so it's a great question because it revolves around what we're talking about today. So what I really want to get into are life issues. Let me see, I cover the important things I wanted to talk about just this morning at the beginning. Yeah. So, in any case, you don't have to necessarily agree, but you need to think about it, right? So even if you, I don't know, just think about why you believe what you believe. That's the most important thing. And then use the tools that I'll provide you, well, you know exist, to try to evaluate these things. So let's look at life issues. Let's look at some of the really important things. So let's remember when we do a logical argument, the first thing that we have to do in logic, the first thing we do is we do our definitions, and then what's second? Assumptions, and then we have our argument, our logos, and then we have our conclusions, and I'm going to broadly call it a telos, but if those who've been in other classes, we know it's not really a telos. The reason I like to put logos and telos is because the New Testament is all about logos and telos. And so if you can key this into your mind that everything, well, anybody in the first service today, in the second reading, did that seem like a logical argument to you that Paul was providing us in Romans about sin and law and stuff like that? That is a beautiful Greek argument. And as I said, the New Testament is filled with, because of Greek document. In any case, let's talk about life issues. Okay, what about life? Is there life before birth? How about life? Does life start at conception? Life at some point in between? Does life begin at birth? Does life begin at some point after birth? Is life at sentience? When does life begin? That's the big question, right? Do you want me to tell you that we know exactly when life begins? I'll get to that in a point. I'll prove it to you. What is death? When does death begin? You know, is death loss of sentience? In other words, brain waves. Is death loss of breath or pulse or mental activity itself? What is human? All these, by the way, can be proven very easily within certain constructs. What about quality of life? Mobility, artificial health, etc., artificial feeding. What's right and what's wrong? That's ethics, right? What's health? What's quality of life? We hear this thing about quality of life all the time. What is quality of life? Well, if you go to the harm construct, you immediately know what quality of life means, right? Not dying. Right? As a matter of fact, I'm just going to posit this, just throw this out. This is an advanced concept, but I'll throw it out. What did we consider people in the past who wanted to kill themselves for any reason?
Mentally deranged.
Mentally ill. Yes, mentally ill. Any person that wanted to kill themselves for any reason was considered mentally ill, because our culture was based simply in rationalism at one point, out of the Age of Enlightenment. The reason we have a different view today is why, do you think? We've moved out of rational thought in large measure. And much of our thinking has become very secularized. And when I say secularized, I mean pagan worldview in general. because secular worldview is very much a pagan worldview. But that's another question, that's another thing. The other question is, what is bad? You know, I like the harm matrix because the harm matrix really allows you to place things in a degree of harm. So you can say, you know, yeah, I'd rather not be dead. You know, I'd rather be maimed than dead. I'd rather be ostracized than dead. I'd rather be this than dead. You see, and you can put it in actual range of things. So you can actually evaluate harm. And of course, yeah.
These are on a personal level rather than society.
Well, and that's something I should have mentioned last week. Very important. You can have 4 levels of harm in this. You can have personal harm. You can have familial harm, like close to people close to you. You can have harm at a national and harm at an international level. And we'll talk about that with the life issues. It's important to note that. So, the first thing is, which construct do you think, and this is very important, because when you begin to talk about these issues, especially if you're going to talk with a secular person, if I'm going to talk with a secular person, which of these constructs do you think I'd start with if I'm talking about life and death issues? Science. Beautiful. Let's do that. Science is great. So what's alive? Anybody know how do we define something that's alive?
Cellular.
That's right. Cellular life, because cells have respiration. The smallest thing, you know, viruses are not considered living things really. The largest living things or smallest living things are bacterium, which are cellular creatures. And so a cell has respiration, it can reproduce. It can basically, the things we define for living things is that they are able to move. Even plants can move. They have respiration, which means they take in energy of some type and they respire, using ATP cycle. It gets kind of complex, but that's all right. And they reproduce. So you have to be able to do all those 3 things to be considered a living thing. That is alive. Now, if we know that, it's very easy to define death. What is death?
The absence of one of those.
The absence not of one of those, the absence of basically cellular respiration. So the absence of cellular respiration is death. Can't debate this one, guys. This is an absolute fact. So, let's say, for example, let's say Daniel falls down out here and he loses no breath. Is he dead? Nope. Not yet. How about if he has no pulse? Is he dead? How about if he has no brainwaves? Is he dead?
That's the medical definition of it.
Ah, medical definition. Which one does that fit in here?
Science.
No, it doesn't.
Law.
It's under law. Also, it's based in history and culture, but it's under law. We'll talk about that.
Law got that from science.
When are you really dead? When are you absolutely dead?
Deteriorate.
When all your cells quit respiration. And how long does that take? Does anybody have an idea? Basically 3 days. 48 hours. At 48 hours, you have complete cellular respiratory death in your whole body. Your cells are no longer living at all. 48 hours, pretty tough. And by the way, that's when you start to have breakdown of really, well, remember, he's been in the grave 4 days, right? 3 days. He's stinking, Lord, right?
3.5.
Because cellular cells have broken down, you're absolutely dead. Isn't it interesting, as a segue, that Jesus was in the grave for 3 days, 48 hours. He experienced a complete cellular death. But that's just an interesting point. In any case, cellular death is the only definition in science for death. Cellular death is the only definition in science. So it's very easy now to define life, isn't it? What, therefore, is life?
Lionel, stop.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Okay.
While any logical person can't disagree that when a cell can no longer respire, it is dead.
Yes.
However, all cells will not die at the same rate, and the fact that you may still have some cells that are respiring, you may not be able to return as Lionel or Steve or David.
I didn't say return. I said, what is the definition of death by science? And that is the definition of death by science. Now, what was brought up is there are other definitions for death, but they're not science. Definitions for death, for example, when are you legally dead? Remember, we say legally dead. By the way, are you dead at all when you are legally dead in this country?
No.
No, because they can harvest your organs and your organs are still alive, right? Theoretically, I could bring you back. But there is a different definition in law than is in science. Now, the legal definition is partially in science and partially developed through history and culture, right? Culturally, we have a definition of what is alive and dead. Historically, we have a definition of what is alive and dead.
Involves technology also.
Well, it has. Because I could, if you croak right now, I could pump your heart and I could pump your lungs and I can keep your cells living for a long time. But you're dead. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. We just started moving into a really dangerous area, didn't we? Because if your body, sarx, is alive, but there's something missing like your spirit or your soul, because there is also a definition of life and death that is based here, right? Do you see this? Do you see why these constructs are so important? Because if I'm debating someone or discussing or arguing, and I'm sticking in a scientific construct, pretty good, right? I can define living and death. I can define life and death. I can define a lot of things. But the minute I start popping back and forth, what happens? Gets really muddy. You have to be very cautious. This is why I'm teaching this class. Because I want you guys to see this. You know, it's very important. You can win an argument here that's going to be really hard to win over here, or there, or there, or there. See? Because science is great. But let's go. What is life? What then is life? If we define death as cellular death, what then is life?
Cellular activity.
Cellular life. So I got to have basically cellular respiration. Okay, so when does life begin, guys?
Conception.
Obviously, life begins at conception. Guess what Roe v. Wade says in the law? When does life begin? No, Roe v. Wade says life begins at conception.
Really?
Oh, yes, ma'am. You need to read it. The law is really specific. It says that the science has shown that life begins at conception. The question in Roe v. Wade is a totally different question, and we're going to get to that. It's very important for you to note this. So the next question, very important to note, is this. What is human? What is human? Well, first of all, why is it important to know about death from a scientific standpoint?
Well, from a medical side of it, it's so you can harvest organs for transplant, for example. You've got to define that.
Well,
Or you can take somebody's organs.
well, I'm thinking scientifically, but the important thing is, okay, so we can make an ethical determination. Because our culture has made an ethical determination by law that it's okay to harvest your organs even though you're not scientifically dead. And I'm not advocating we not do that. I'm just pointing out what is life and what is death. Again, we know why the life issue is a big deal, because I don't want somebody harvesting my organs when I'm still alive, but likewise, I don't want them killing me when I'm alive, right? If you define life and death, then that really plays into all these other things. The other point is, why do we want to define what is human?
Because if you kill something, you need to know if it's, I guess, going to give you a punishment or not. Like if you kill a plant, you're not going to get life imprisonment. But if you were the death penalty, if you kill.
Depends on the plant.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Now, now do you see this? This is beautiful, because in our law, there are actually plants and animals that if you kill them, you will get harm from the government. The government will actually put you in jail and take away your life, liberty, and your economic viability because you harmed an animal. Very important to note. But Tammy's right. You know, if we can define what is human, for example, if I define black people as not human, then I can easily make them slaves, right? If I find white people